This. Okay.
Ha
And we're live, allegedly. I never trust these things. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
It said we were live.
It did, but you can't believe everything you see on the internet. So hey,
That
look, I
is
can see that
true.
I can see now that we're live on my second laptop. So hopefully we'll stay alive tonight. Because I want to play a game, Aaron. No. So yeah, this is, believe it or not, this is the 5th of 5. I guess that makes sense. Scare-a-Thon broadcasts that we've done for the month of October in 2020 in support of the Boxville Chicago marketplace. And, we've got some wonderful donations in over the course of this. I mean, at the end of the show, if you have that figure or a rough figure, I'd like you to share it with us, sure. Just to see how your efforts and our efforts and the folks at home have been doing over the last 5 weeks. But yeah, tonight is kind of a special show because we're going to be talking about Saw, the entire Saw franchise. Now, we're not going to be going through each movie, like devoting 10 minutes to each, because that's 80 minutes. We only have an hour, but there's a lot to dig into here. I think the genesis of this was, it might have even been, was it Brian that brought it up, or was it you that brought up the fact that the last official Saw movie came out 10 years ago? Was that you?
Guilty.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that was Saw, the quote unquote final chapter. And as we know from final chapters previous, it wasn't. And also, if we were living in a world without COVID-19, we would have had another Saw movie by now, Spiral, from the Book of Saw, which was, I know it was starring, I don't know if Chris Rock produced it, but I feel like he was behind it in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And that's been pushed to next year, like so many other films. So it was a good excuse to kind of dust off a franchise that I used to be really, passionate about up to a certain point, but I hadn't watched these movies in a long time. So did some cramming. I know you did some cramming, and we came ready to play and discuss all of these movies. But before we get to that, first I'd like to introduce you to those who are just joining us for the first time, or if you've been hanging out for the last few weeks, thank you. But I'm here with Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. You are the inspiration for the Scare-a-Thon, the standard bearer for the last decade. This is the first year we've done anything kind of live, but for the past 10 years, you have been watching scary movies all October long and collecting, raising money for various charitable organizations. This year, it's Boxville Marketplace in Chicago, which is kind of helping underserved parts of the community by offering like business opportunities for people to open up their own kind of small businesses in these shipping container malls, which is a really cool thing. So yeah, thank you for joining us. It looks like it's just gonna be you and me flying tonight, talking about Saw, which is okay because there's a lot to get through. But I'm gonna stop talking and just say, welcome, Aaron. How you doing?
Why, thank you. And thanks to everybody who has watched one of the shows, who has read the blog, who has donated. It has really been a terrific October so far. I'm excited to have our full moon Saturday night, Halloween tomorrow. So yeah, it's been, and I appreciate the fact that, like, for our 10th anniversary, we did kind of amp things up a bit with doing the live broadcasts and doing it once a week. It's been super exciting. It's been great to see you every week, because we don't get to see each other very often, and certainly not as often as we've gotten to over the past month. So this has been great fun on a lot of levels, and it's funny to kind of be taking a sharp left turn out of Italy, which is where we've spent the past 4 weeks, and to head into the basement and the various traps where Jigsaw lay.
Yeah, indeed. And watching all those Italian horror movies and Gialli kind of prepared me or re-prepared me to watch these films, because these get pretty dark and graphic themselves. But before we get to that, I would like to say, if you are watching this either live or later on when we put up as a regular YouTube video, please feel free to like the video, like the channel, subscribe. We'd love to have you. And also a shout out to, I want to get this right, Saw Space Forum, which is you can follow them on Twitter. I learned about them yesterday, just kind of scrolling through Twitter. They've been posting these, well, posts about Saw, because that's kind of their thing. They're the Saw Space Forum. But I didn't realize yesterday was the 16th anniversary of the debut of the original Saw.
No way.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I tweeted out this morning when I, like was awake, because last night when I saw them, I'm like, I want to do something about this, but I'm too tired. So I retweeted them, and I invited some people to come hang out tonight. So if there's anyone here from Saw Space Forum, welcome, and thank you to the Saw Space Forum for giving that bit of information. Let's start with that. The original Saw, I remember there was so much buzz around this film. I think from like festivals, I could be wrong about that. Before it was the big horror franchise, it was just an independent horror movie.
Right.
And people were saying, oh my God, you have to see this movie. It's crazy. It's gruesome. And that ending, I went with a friend of mine and my little brother to go see it opening night. And we were turned away because everything had sold out. So we went home. I don't think I even saw until it came out on home video, probably the next year or some months later. And by that point, the phenomenon was everywhere. I hadn't had the ending spoiled for me, which is, great and unique in today's day and age. But it was a very kind of a special movie that, much like The Human Centipede, it had a reputation that I think the film itself did not live up to in terms of the graphic violence. You got that in Saw 2, along with The Human Centipede 2, but the first Saw is almost like a CSI detective movie comparatively. And yeah, it's got an ending that is still, even if it's not surprising anymore today, it's still so well done that it feels new every time I watch it. So what was your feeling about the original Saw, directed by James Wan, Aquaman's James Wan, and written by Lee Wanell?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it is that James Wan is now Aquaman. He's Fast and Furious 7. He's he's also the Conjuring guy. Yeah, I did see Saw 4 in the theater in October in 2004, and so I had a mixed, because I did have the ending spoiled for me, because I was just fresh to the IMDb message boards, and there was a post that said, and we're going to be doing spoilers galore, folks, so just be advised.
Yes.
But the post title was, "The dead guy on the floor is the killer."
No.
And it didn't mean anything to me, of course, but then I saw the dead guy on the floor and I went, that's what that post means. So I did have that spoiled for me. However, my biggest takeaway from the original viewing of Saw was how like frenetic it was in terms of, and I've watched the movie several times since then, and what it is it's a young director, covering his budgetary constraints. He's trying to make things exciting because he doesn't have a lot of flash to go to smooth things out, as they would later have. They later had a lot more money to play with, but I think it was made for like $1 million.
Jesus.
And of course, you got Carrie Elwes, you got Danny Glover, so you have actual names, so I'm sure some of the budget went there. But speaking of Carrie Elwes, my biggest takeaway was this was a very busy film with a young director trying to prove himself. I thought the story was really strong in terms of keeping you engaged throughout, but it did not hold up to the logic police afterwards. Like we sat down and we just went pick. And the movie kind of falls apart when you look at it closely, just the first one. And I bring that up because it's the one time where the plot holes in the first one allow these ongoing sequels to keep filling in those gaps, and that's what makes the franchise what it is for me. It's if it was a locked down, rock solid plot in the first movie, it wouldn't have been as much fun. But because they're like, well, wait, how does that even happen? Oh, in part 3, we find out that's how that happened. Oh, part 4, that's how that happened. That's how that happened. And so it's like that part of it I found really intriguing in retrospect.
Now, let me ask you about that, because I have not. Sorry, Eric Anderson. Welcome back, Eric. He jumps in with a very astute point. So few movies withstand the logic police, which is a great point. But here's my question about that, because I don't think that I picked up on those plot holes when I first watched Saw. I certainly understand what you're saying about the sequels filling in a lot of those things. So I wonder, were those really plot holes, like flaws in Lee Wanell's, kind of imagination or plotting, or were they like the Jigsaw killer and the idea of the Jigsaw puzzle, which really comes into focus when you watch these movies back to back over the course of a week, like we both did?
Right.
Could it be that he had Saw 5 in mind? He had his giant serial killer whiteboard with the red strings going, and he's like, this is going to come back to play later. I'm just not going to share this out with the audience.
Absolutely not.
No,
it was envisioned as a one-off. It was based off of their short film that they had done, which was produced as a calling card to Hollywood. So no, they had no intention of doing a sequel to it. They had no intention of it becoming a franchise. So that's why I have to look at it as these are just straight up plot holes from young screenwriters, because Saw 2 is actually based off of Darren Lynn Bousman's script, and I forget the name of it, but it was an unproduced script that he was trying to get made, and producers, after Saw made so much money, they went, hey, wait, we can make this idea, the idea of people in a house, we can make that into Saw 2. And so that's how that came to be. And then Saw 3 was to wrap it all up, because things went in trilogies in that time.
Yeah.
And then Patrick Dunstan, I always get these two mixed up. It's Patrick Melton and Marcus
Dunstan. Yeah.
So those are our two screenwriters for 4 through 7.
Weren't they on Project Greenlight, like some of the later seasons?
They wrote the Feast movies, which I had forgotten, and I went back and I was like, because I love the first Feast.
Gallagher.
The Feast movie is so much fun. So, and I have nothing but admiration for those guys. I know we're jumping way ahead, but I have nothing but admiration for what they did with 4 through 7 in terms of continuing to bring things out of the first 2, 3, first, and keep incorporating them in. So it was kind of like these wonderful Easter eggs. You could go back and look at it and go, oh. And what's interesting is watching, especially the first one, watching it and going, that shouldn't pay off. But knowing what I know now about Dr. Gordon and looking back, I'm like, oh, okay, hang on. And, the same thing with, Donnie Wahlberg's character throughout. So there's these fun little things that pay off in retrospect. And I give so much credit to Dunstan and Melton for that.
Yeah. And I want to give some credit to Lee Wanell as well, because I have no reason to doubt what you're saying is true, that, he and James Wan want to just make a one-off horror movie as you said, a calling card. Like, if this thing makes $1 billion, then they'll let us make our other own projects we want to do. But they kind of got swept up in that Matrix thing, where it's like a self-contained story, but now we've got to do a 2 and a 3 because these things are they're products now. But I got to say, in terms of the way he handled the first 2 sequels, I mean, I think it's a masterful job. I don't know if he went online and just like spent a couple of days reading everyone's comments and finding the plot holes, like these are the things that pissed me off. This doesn't make any sense. And maybe he used that as his springboard for actually filling things in. Or if he was aware enough, like all artists and filmmakers, when they finish making something, they turn it in, it goes out, and they're like, I just wish I had time to fix this one thing, or this light was off or whatever. So however he did it, that first trilogy is just wonderful. And it's strange because I don't know if the intention, as you mentioned, the trilogy thing, which I recall it being a problem too, but it's kind of the good old days before everything was a cinematic universe with 19,000 movies.
Uh,
But it is set up for a sequel. So I don't know if he just kind of left that dangling there, like this could end right now, or someone else is going to pick up and run with it. I've got my money. I'm going to run.
right.
But having said that, Saw 4, I know we are jumping kind of all around here, but time is precious. We should have like one of those Jigsaw clocks running, the giant red readout in the background. But Saw 4 was, and again, we're talking spoilers here. It was something that at that point I had not seen, and it blew my mind. People have kind of copied it in the years since, but it's what I call a paraquel, where it's not a prequel, it's not a sequel, it's happening the exact same time as the previous film, and it adds this other layer of, importance to a lot of those events. And I was just like, okay, if this is where it all ends, I don't need to see anything else. This is beautiful.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, and I mean, and when we talk about the first one, again, it is a one-off, and then it's so the logic police stuff, it's like, why would, if you're the killer, why would you sedate yourself in the center of the room? Like, to what end? What could that possibly get you? You don't get to observe anything. You're, I mean, I'm just kind of like, I don't get it. Like, it makes zero sense. If you're going to, I mean, if anything, I would have the accomplice, rather than having the accomplice being the one who's running around doing stuff. And it turns out there's two accomplices, it's like, wait, like, I'll just put you there, and that way I can sit and watch what happens.
Well,
so
I mean,
that was always an issue for me.
Yeah, if you're talking about Saw as a standalone film, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless John Kramer, who is, Jigsaw, and correction, sir, he's not the killer. He always gave people a choice.
Correct. That's true. That's right. That message board was wrong.
Yes. But maybe it was he wanted the satisfaction of being there to be a part of the game, and also to be able to give that, because that stinger, that last little bit where he stands up and closes the door, that's not just for us. I think it's also for him to twist that knife in the person who loses the game, to say, all of these kind of tools and clues were here, all along for me to ostensibly figure out, but we messed up. Yeah.
Well, and if I could throw something in, like that notion of, like, why does Adam lose the game? It's like he says the key to that lock is in the tub, but the key went down the drain, so it was a no-win trap. Unless he was planning on going back and letting him out later. Like, that's what I mean, like the little plot holes. I'm like, if Jigsaw is creating things that you have a choice and you can live or die, why would he create something where it's like, okay, well, now you've lost the key?
That's actually something that I hadn't really thought about, but it was a splinter in my brain watching it again. I actually watched the first 3, I think, last week. And yeah, that stuck out to me too, especially after you see the rest of the Saw films and you realize that is the big difference between Jigsaw and all of the people he recruits after him, is he is pure. He's sadistic in the fact that he'll come up with these traps and eventually his actions lead to the deaths of people, but he always does give them a fair chance. Whereas the people he brings on, in order to test them, they always end up falling apart because they get, jealous or vindictive. And that was kind of a key point of some of the later sequels, was there are Jigsaw traps, which the audience are just supposed to think of as Jigsaw traps, but there's key tells that it's not. And now that you mention it, yeah, that first one, I almost have to watch it again, or maybe, I don't even know if there is a commentary by 1L on that first one. But
I believe there is. And had we had more time, had it not been October, I probably would have taken time out. And I have intention to actually, having gone through them in close succession, I would love to go back and listen to some of the commentary. I did read a lot of like interviews and trivia points and things like that, just to kind of, while it was still fresh. but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I like about Saw. I'll tell you one of the things I don't like about Saw was Carrie Elwes. Like I thought Carrie Elwes was terrible when I first saw it in 2004. That was what stuck out to me the most. Like his emotional scenes of like, oh, I was like, oh my God, you're horrible. Like, what deal with the devil did you make that you were so good in Princess Bride and you've been so horrible ever since? Barring Robin Hood Men in Tights.
I was going to say you got to make an exception there, but
yeah,
that was more comedy. Yeah.
But,
I'm with you.
Horrible.
I'm with you on that. I loved him in this. Well, I should say I thought he was a really good choice up until the part where, as you said, he breaks down, he saws off his leg, and then he's like kind of this bubbling blubbermouthed guy. I guess he's going crazy, but he gets kind of like cartoon cross-eyed as he's, melting down, and I don't know what that was about.
Well, and the makeup is dreadful. I mean, again, it feels like it's an independent film. Like it feels like, okay, well, we gotta make him look like he's all pale, and so we're gonna grab the clown white out of the Ben Nye kit. And I was like, oh dear. Like they put the big crazy circles under his eyes. I mean, it's really not a good makeup job. Anyway, so that was one of the things that had always stuck out to me on my first viewing. Now, in subsequent viewings, my synapses have just, I'm like used to bad acting now, having watched enough independent horror films that I'm like, it's fine. But who also is not good is Lee Wanell. His accent slips a little bit, and I'm like, oh man, maybe I was blinded by Carrie's my issues with Carrie to begin with, but like neither of you are really quite, you both of you have issues.
Well, here, first of all, I got to take a quick pause because I forgot to turn on our Boxville.org/donate banner, which is now crawling across your screen. So just to bring it back to why we're here tonight, aside from talking about Saw, is to please donate, if you can, to Boxville Chicago Marketplace. And they really appreciate any help that you can give.
And if we make you mad, donate. If we don't make you mad, donate.
So we got to please everybody. But here's a question, because I like Lee Wanell as an idea in this movie, but I think a lot of it is struggling with that accent. He's, I don't know, I can't remember if he's from Australia or New Zealand.
Yep.
Okay. I should know this because I actually interviewed him, and he's such a sweet guy. I was talking to him about the movie Upgrade, which I also loved.
Oh,
but I wish I had like 3 hours to talk with him about Saw, because I would bring up that key issue. But he just felt like he was struggling with that accent, and it was kind of overpowering what he was able to do. I feel like he was capable enough. I mean, he's a writer, sure, and a brilliant one, I think. But if it had just been, hey, you've got this American doctor trapped in a room with an Australian photographer, because
would have been fine.
Right. We are a multicultural society. That's why whenever I see someone like in a movie that's set in New York and they're talking like a stereotypical like mob boss or something, like, you could just be from Chicago. I know you're or whatever. But yeah, that's the kind of the problem. This is a very much an indie film, and Lee Wanell shows up in other Saw sequels briefly. And I think the makeup, was it in Saw 3 that we learned what his fate was at the hands of Amanda? I feel like, I don't know if that was part 2. I think it was 3. The makeup in that was really good because we get to see, bigger budget and everything. But when she goes into that room and he's still kind of chained to the floor and on the verge of death, he looked like he was actually on the verge of death.
For sure. Actually, and one other like little thing that bugs me, and then I'll stop picking on Saw, I promise. But like, you got Michael Emerson as his assistant, the one who kidnaps Dr. Gordon's
Zep.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
You got Zep. My brain keeps firing to other things I want to say, but I'm going to stick to this one. When Zep kidnaps Dr. Gordon's wife and child, like, he's like terrorizing her, like with the gun, and listen to, and I'm like, this is not the act of somebody who has been forced to do this. Like, we're being led to think, this is where I'm like, we're being led to think that this is the killer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. It's not Jigsaw. Jigsaw is not running the show here. Jigsaw is not asking him to do this. So this is happening purely of his own accord. And I'm like, well, what's happening? Like, why are you terrorizing? If you don't really want to be doing this, then why are you doing it and relishing it so much?
I can't remember what Zepp's deal is, because he does not come back into the story really at all in the later films. But did Jigsaw
beaten to death? Yeah.
Yeah, did Jigsaw, did he have blackmail on him or what? I don't even remember what his deal was, and it was only a week ago that I said.
Right. No, I don't remember either. I mean, sorry. Yep, I don't remember, but he does have something on him, and so he's forcing him to do it. He's forcing him to be part of this conspiracy. But yeah, I just thought that was like, that seems odd in retrospect. Knowing what you know, you're like, well, why does Zepp do the things he does? Now, what I was going to say, as soon as you said Zepp, now, can we just talk about Charlie Clouser's main theme, which is called, Zepp's theme.
Oh.
And it became what was associated with the theme of the series, the musical theme. Because I want to say, and I'm willing to, engage in discussion, but I think it may be the last great horror theme since like 28 Days Later. I can't remember like a theme from a scary movie that I'm like, instantly I know that that's what that is. This Paranormal Activity doesn't really have one because it's a found footage type of situation.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of like other major franchises. Like, I couldn't tell you that I couldn't do the Conjuring theme for you if you had a gun to my head. But the Saw theme, like, they nailed it from the get-go. Like, it's there in the first movie, and it is just, they keep using it in the best possible way. That the rising strings, I just love it.
I think the closest, and this isn't a horror film, but the closest is probably Hans Zimmer's score for the Joker in The Dark Knight. Whenever it sort of announced that he was going to be on screen, because there was this slow, stringy build, and that got really uncomfortable as he, finally emerged. But I'm there with you. I love that there's so many different layers to it, because it starts off very slow. It's almost like this ticking, like a mechanical ticking, like, and then it builds to the da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. The one thing I'm not crazy about is it ends on this almost like an operatic, almost like a love thing. It was like da 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 da. I'm like, that's like one step too far.
You have issues with the grace notes.
Yeah, but yeah, I love it. It's also the kind of they use it really well in some of the later films. I can't remember if it was 6 or 7, but there's almost like the double reveal. There's like the and damn, I should have written this down, and maybe I did, but I don't have my notes with me. Great job, Ian. But there's like the third act, and it's like 15 minutes before the movie ends, and you hear the music, and you're like, oh, this is the big reveal. But then the movie's still going on, and they do it again because there's like another reveal on top of that. It's just a great signal that this is the moment where you're going to get your usual suspects flipping back through the chapters of the film and the other films to see how it all lines up. And there was part of me that as the movies went on, I got annoyed, because I'm like, this is not like in the previous films. It was kind of like this is what the characters are now remembering. They're realizing about the horrible mistakes they made and the decisions and the help that Jigsaw was giving them to get out of their own traps. But as it went on, because they were so complicated and there was so much of a franchise, they became more for the audience. Like, hey, you out there, you remember this guy from part 3? Well, he did this weird thing with the envelope or whatever, and now it's paid off. So, but there's no way that the people who were in the scene where the flashback was happening would be privy to any of that. So it's a minor nitpick, but it's just kind of fun. It's like putting that last, the 3 pieces away from the jigsaw puzzle being complete, and you're like turning those pieces around to see how they hook into the other slots. So yeah, it's fun.
No, and I again, that's where I I really like how the directors, like Darren Lynn Bousman for Saw 4, Kevin Hackle for 5, and then Kevin Grudert for 6 and 7. Like, them working with Melton and Dunstan to kind of incorporate those little pieces in and have those little payoffs. Because I really those are what are fun and what make the franchise enjoyable from episode to episode. I would argue that it gets less enjoyable as things go on, and we can talk more about that, as we move forward. Are we ready to move forward to Saw 2?
Yeah, we almost have to, because
I feel like
for a half hour already.
I know it's like you got to talk about the entire thing, but also like it did come out in installments, and I was always impressed that they could keep going.
Well, what I loved is that I think it was part 3 and maybe between like 3 and 6 when these things were kind of like at their peak. The ad campaigns would start saying, if it's Halloween, it's got to be Saw.
Yeah.
And damn it, I was in the theater. Like, I missed the first one in the theater, but from 2 until the final chapter, every Halloween or whenever these came out, like sometime early October, I was in the theater with my friends watching these movies.
Yep.
The return on investment did diminish, but I got to say, I think the key to these films, and I was with you, past 4 previously, like 5 and then the final chapter, I thought were kind of garbage. I really loved 6 just because I think it was right in the middle of this thing where after part 4, they're like, where can we go from here? All right, let's start making these movies about something. So part 5 was, oh, it's a group of people and they're all screwing over people in the housing market. This is 2009, so it's very much like what's in the news. And then, or 2008, and then 2009 was part 6, and it's like it's the healthcare, market, people being screwed over, pre-existing conditions and all that. So that was kind of fun. But part 5 in particular. Well, let me just finish my initial point. Seeing these movies in the theater one year after the other, they do lose something watching them that way, whereas binging them, it becomes almost like the Netflix experience, where you watch them in rapid succession. It's a lot easier to keep in mind who these characters were, what they meant to each other, and understanding when you find out what they really meant to the overall plot going back years, it's still fresh in your head instead of like, God, now I got to go and read my review of the last one or watch the last one or pregame and all this other stuff. So yeah, it's better when you're watching them all together. But Saw 5, my problem with that was and I appreciate it in retrospect because of where the story goes, but it has just such a mean spirit to it. Scott Patterson plays the new FBI agent, Agent Strahm, and he's with his partner, Agent Perez, and I liked them together. We also got this crooked cop agent, or Officer Hoffman. Detective Hoffman. Yep. They'd been around since I think part 4, but in part 5, their dynamics really come to the fore. And you realize Hoffman is, not only part of this Jigsaw thing, he's taking it to a whole new level now that Jigsaw is, dead or deadish, depending on where we are in the time frame. And Strahm is hot on his tail. But at the very end of that movie, it was so dark that the good guy gets not only trapped in a room, but he gets crushed and mangled. And it's like, am I supposed to be enjoying this, that the good guy is getting away scot-free and smirking as his rival's blood and gore is splattering down in this glass coffin? I just left kind of feeling sick to my stomach.
That's interesting. So let's back up really quick to 2.
Sorry.
Okay. Because I definitely have thoughts on 5, 6, and 7.
Sure.
But so 2, I thought, again, it's inspired by a script by Darren Lynn Bousman, and then he and Nell wrote the screenplay together. And I thought it was a really imaginative way to keep that character alive, literally, but also really kind of expanding what he was capable of. The notion of the 5 people or six people in the house,
something like that, yeah.
And that you could have the parallel storylines going on, and that that would get more and more involved as the series went on. But the idea of what we're watching now the confrontation between Detective Matthews and Jigsaw, and then the microcosm of what's happening in the house and how the two interact and how the two relate with each other. I really, really enjoyed that. And again, as you point out, things aren't even that gory. They get pretty bad. I think we have the gunshot through the head. We have what's his name cutting the Xavier cutting the not Xavier. Is that his name?
Maybe.
Anyway, he cuts the back of his number off. But it's not like the crazy gore that we get to in the next installment.
Well,
in
it's
fact,
not so much
the most troubling trap is Amanda and the needle trap.
Yeah, and it's not even so much about gore. I think that's a good distinction. It's shocking. I mean, the needle trap, it's just so uncomfortable because it's so well done. She falls into this pit of hypodermic needles and then has to thrash around to find a key to open the door. And I felt it somehow even more watching it, last week than I did even in the movie theater. And that's one of the great communal experiences, just like listening to everybody squirm and shout like, hell no, and pass out probably. But yeah, the gross out factor really gets amped up later on. And one of the things I think is a testament to this entire series is it kind of became known as the progenitor of mainstream torture porn. And yet we have not. This is the first time in nearly 40 minutes of discussing this franchise that we've even talked about the blood or the gore. We've been talking about the story, the ideas, the performances, which I think is
right.
Great.
Well, and I mean, and that's I think that was what got to me as the series went on, is that I became less and less interested in the gore and the traps. Even I became fascinated by the story of tracking down Detective Hoffman and all of his conspirators. So it's like whenever we cut away to do like the trap stuff, because it's a Saw movie, I was kind of like, oh God, do we have to? It's like, can't we just follow like the more interesting narrative? So that was something, because that's where things started to feel padded to me. Like when we look at 4 through 7, like that story of Detective Hoffman and his association with Jigsaw, that's the really interesting narrative to me. Taking the time out to do the traps, it was fine, but it was never as interesting to me as that overarching narrative.
They're interesting only insofar as when they serve the story, like the pendulum trap, or the trap that I think Amanda set up for Dina Meyer's character, who was the other kind of original detective who I think appeared in part 2, where she was hung from the ceiling with these hooks in her ribs. She actually got the key out by putting her hand in acid, but when it was supposed to open up, it didn't. Right. And that's when we find out again that these kind of people that Jigsaw was hiring or training, they were doing their own stuff. And they're like, right, we're going to make some traps that are unwinnable. And you feel bad from an audience perspective, because you start wondering, did it malfunction? Has Jigsaw changed his MO? Like, what's going on here? And then you kind of forget about it. And then like a movie later, it'll be like, oh, here's what was going on with this.
Well, I remember now, I had a very, very strong emotional response to seeing Saw 3 in the theater, because, it's 2006 and, we are well into the age of Hostel and Wolf Creek. And like, we are in it. Like the torture porn era has begun. And, like Saw 3, I felt like they were going overboard intentionally. They were like, oh, you think this is what we are? Okay, we'll be the thing that you say we are. We will be absolutely mean and gross, and we will focus on the intricate and anatomical details of a body being broken apart. So I remember watching it and just being like, wait a minute, like these traps, like you can't escape them. Like this isn't fair. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel. And remember, I just getting really upset on like the behalf of the audience and being like we shouldn't have to sit through this. And then the payoff of finding out, oh no, these are Amanda's traps, and she will be punished because they are unwinnable. And I went, oh, wow. I really, really, really like that, because now all the pain and suffering that the victims and the audience has endured has been for a point.
Yeah.
And I think that was lost on a lot of people. I think a lot of critics were just like, no, no, no. But it was like, no, no, there was a reason behind this. And I really, I really was intrigued by it, and I was impressed by it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, Saw 3 is kind of probably my high watermark for the series. Just because I like the way it all ties everything together, including the Detective Matthews story. And we get to each of these films, we get to know a bit more about the players.
Yep.
You know, Amanda, and even I think this might have been where we see more about John Kramer and the introduction of Jill Tuck, his wife, who becomes more important later on. And these little talk about the Easter eggs. There is these constant like shots of Jill Tuck in a park. I don't even think she speaks in this movie. We just see her like, oh my God, John Kramer had a wife.
Right.
You see her in the park kind of like turning and facing the camera, and you see someone walking like in the park in, you know, almost just in the background. It's Abby from the second movie. And like,
yeah.
And then later on when we start to, I think it might be part 4 where they open up about the Kramer's backstory with opening this clinic to help people. And like, it's all like junkies and people with like severe mental problems. And a lot of those folks end up in the traps. The girl from part 2 that gets cut with the razors, she was the prostitute who was strung out, who was kind of annoying John Kramer on the night that his wife, you know, was ambushed in the clinic and they lost their baby. It becomes really kind of soap opera-ish.
Yeah.
But later on, I think it might have been Saw 5 when we find out who was with the guy who was breaking into the clinic, and it was Amanda, and she is ultimately responsible. And Hoffman is using that information to blackmail her,
right,
in terms of their dynamic with John. Like, this is insane.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's just it. I'm like, because when do we find out about the miscarriage? Is that 4?
That might be 4. Yeah, okay. I think it is.
So that makes sense that, you know, like that's Dunstan and Melton, you know, that their universe. But no, I thought that, I mean, when I was watching 3, I was like, it is mean-spirited, but that's because Amanda's mean-spirited.
Mm-hmm.
And so it fits with the tone of the movie. And then when we move on to 4, which again, I love the fact that it's happening at the same time as 3. I think that's just a master stroke. And the fact that they're able to make it work, and that one, the logic police can't arrest them. Like, it actually works. And I guess that's why I'm like, I totally call the logic police on the first one, because I'm like, it doesn't work. But they, for the most part, they do work progressively better. They keep filling in those gaps as the story goes on. But what I loved about 4 was because 3 was such a satisfying conclusion. It was like, this wraps up the whole thing. You know, everybody's dead in the room. And then you see 4, and they make that point of that ridiculous autopsy at the very beginning where you're just like, and they're like, and it was just like, underline, underline, underline. Jigsaw is dead. He's dead. He's dead. He's dead. Did you get that he's dead? Because he's dead. Because his head's been cut. His brain's, he's dead. And I was like, okay, I guess he's dead. But then for them to string, you know, Officer Riggs' storyline forward, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, you have totally got me now. Like, because I kind of see 4 as the high water mark, because it was like, we can continue to tell this story in a really interesting way.
Yeah, I'm there with you. It's like a really close tie between 3 and 4 for me. I also love Riggs's test and the various ways that Jigsaw is testing people. It's not necessarily, can you get to this person before the clock runs out? It's, can you not? Like, can you can you take a step back and try not to save everybody, especially when I tell you the whole way to win the game is to step back and not try and save everybody, but they're going to bust through that door, and the giant hammer is going to come down on Martin or Donnie Wahlberg. But yeah, that autopsy scene was great. One thing that I picked up on, and again, this would be a great question for Wanell or Melton and Dunstan. At the end of Saw 3, we do get that brief shot, and it doesn't make sense until 4, of Jigsaw pouring the wax on the tape.
Yep.
At his bedside. We don't see him swallow it until a flashback in part 4, but you're like, what's that about? And it was, if Wanell was really going out the door, was that something that he had thought about? Like, did he contact the other screenwriters to say, hey, I heard you guys are doing part 4, here's a little something for you? Or was it just like, whoever comes after me, if this goes anywhere, this is, let's see if they pick up on this.
Well, and also you're just kind of like, because they do, it's very specific. It's pointed up. It's not, it's not something that they reverse engineer. Like, it's right there in 3. You're like, what is he doing pouring the wax? And I love that. I really love that, because again, it pays off, and it pays off so wonderfully in 4.
Yeah. Now, so 5, we kind of already talked about.
Well, no, I do want to talk about 5.
Okay.
And I'm watching the clock, but because
I'm open. It's all about you, baby. I can hang out.
We haven't talked about Agent Strom enough, because I think Agent Strom, like, what I don't like about 5 is that Agent Strom is like, he's a viable foe to Detective Hoffman. And I mean, the guy like gives himself a tracheotomy in the opening trap, and I'm like, this guy's a badass. This guy is good. And then for all of 5, because we've shown what a badass he is, all he does is go through and revisit old crime scenes just so we can see those scenes play out and get the backstory behind those earlier traps. And so it's kind of like, oh man, like, you couldn't think of anything more interesting for this guy to do. And I really am bummed out that he dies at the end of 5, because it just seems like such a waste. Even though they do turn it, I mean, but how great would it have been to keep Agent Strom alive and make him a suspect? Like he becomes in 6.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the Dark Knight, it could have been that thing where the Batman has to become he has to be hated by everybody just so he can kind of save face with Two-Face. Yeah, that would have been great. I almost don't have a problem with the fact that he is just going back and looking through the crime scenes and piecing it all together, because it almost makes it more cruel, because you almost get this feeling that in that 3rd act, he's going to go and he's going to really corner Kaufman and maybe become the hero that we expect him to be.
Yeah.
But no, he's just, as in happens in real life, you've got these great plans to do stuff and you make a stupid mistake, or you don't listen to what Jigsaw told you. You go through that door, and all of a sudden you're face to face with a glass coffin full of crushed glass. And
I mean, and I do like that. By and large, Jigsaw gives you the truth. If you just listen to him, if you listen beyond your surface interpretation, like, you could have passed this trap, could have passed the test. I mean, again, I was just like, it seemed like we had like an actual, a viable foe, and we just kind of squandered him at the end. I was like, dang it. Because then, you go into 6 and you've got Henriksen, is that his name? Who's his boss?
Oh, I don't remember. I could never keep track of his name.
Perez and her superior.
Yeah. I don't know. The other FBI guy,
Erickson.
I guess. Erickson. Okay. Perez, that was a nice little bit of a reveal, because what we see of her in 5 is, well, in part 4, she gets her face like blown up by a Billy the Puppet bomb, essentially.
Right.
She's taken to the hospital. In part 5, we see Strom in a hospital room with like blood all over the bed, and I think he says they took her out or something.
Right.
She turns out she's alive, which I don't know what the timeline is between then and when she shows up in part 6. So I'm like, because she's got some scarring, but she's kind of wearing the same outfit. It's almost like, oh, they released her the next day and she's back on the job.
At some point, I would love to sit down and like, I'm sure it's out there in the web somewhere, but like an actual like how long things take in between movies. Because, like when they said Detective Matthews, the Donnie Wahlberg character, had been missing for 6 months, I was like, wait, 6 months? It's 6 months later? Wait, when? Okay. But anyway, carry on.
No, it does get really confusing, and I don't even know if I'd want to look at that timeline, because then it might make me question these movies more than I already do. And I'm along for the ride because I think they're really smart.
Yeah.
But yeah, so part 6 I think was really a cool movie because you've got the main character, Easton, I think, the head of the healthcare company, or like a VP or something. He's got the dog pit, which is his team of 6 people whose jobs it is to go through everyone's policy and look for loopholes so they can be denied coverage or save the company money. And they all get kind of picked up, and he's got to go through his own house of horrors with these various tests. And it's not Schadenfreude, but you do get, I kind of felt sorry for him towards the end, because you do get the feeling that he's learned something and he is genuinely sad, but then he sort of has to cosmically atone for his sins. And it's the son of one of the people that he denied coverage is the one who flips the switch and ends up filling his body full of like needles pumped with acid, and he dissolves. That's horrible. I almost wondered if, because we don't see what happens with that mother and son. Right. I was kind of waiting to see if Jigsaw was like, now you failed your test because you just killed somebody. Like, you've let vengeance, destroy a life, which Jigsaw is kind of not about.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this was my issue with 6, because I do like that it got political. However, Jigsaw's MO has been value a life. Like, how much blood are you willing to shed to move forward into your new life?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas his MO gets completely flipped for 6, because it becomes about him choosing who will live and who will die.
Yes.
Which reflects the insurance. I get that it reflects the insurance, mindset, but it is contrary to, it is requiring Jigsaw to be a murderer. Like, he is now making people die. And when he says, I never killed anyone, that's true. But in this case, he's like, it's a case where somebody has to die. And he flat out says 4 of them will die, 2 will live, when it comes to that carousel trap. And so that's where I kind of went, this seems a little off. However, if I know you want to say something, I'm just going to jump back really quick to 2. Or no, actually, it's the first one. So Amanda, her trap, she got the reverse bear trap on. What did the guy who has the key in his stomach, what did he do? Because I think, and I'm also like, wait, this is showing how willing Amanda is to kill somebody else to get a key to let herself out. Like, and I'm kind of like, well, how does that fit in with your philosophy, Mr. Kramer?
Well, I don't know if that guy on the floor is someone that we see later. I know we see that scene from different angles later on, but it's specifically in the context of that was the guy on the floor in Amanda's room. Right. I think we might see him get dragged in there, but we never see who he is. I'm wondering if, because as we see and saw the final chapter, Jigsaw and Hoffman have been doing this for a long time to a lot of people. So I'm wondering if, and it's kind of cool to think about this sort of Elseworld story. What if the guy on the floor had been through another game and he lost, And so his punishment is you're just going to be the victim. Like, I know I've calculated that Amanda is likely going to kill you by digging a key out of your stomach. So that's he lost, but he just didn't get like blown up right away. He gets drugged and sent to another room. That's just my theory. But even going back to what you're saying about the the rule of 2 people live and 4 people die, even in part 5, we talked about the detective story. We didn't talk really at all about the House of Horrors with the people who were involved in that real estate scam.
Right.
But even those traps were set up. So if they did work together, and as he said, go against your selfish instincts or your natural instincts, which I guess are selfish, all 5 of them could have walked out of there.
Correct.
Which is interesting, but that's not the case in part 6. And I wonder, keep me honest here, was part 6 purely a Jigsaw trap, or would that have been something that maybe Jigsaw had set up, had conceived of, that Hoffman carried out, but he set it up to kill people?
And that's possible because, I mean, I think those are the 6, like that's one of the envelopes that is passed on as an assignment that he's supposed to carry out.
Oh, that's right. There were 5, maybe it was 6, and there was a 7th envelope or something, because Jill Tuck makes...
There's 5 envelopes that she gives to Hoffman, and then there's one that she keeps behind because that's Hoffman. to get Hoffman.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch at least parts of these again to see if I could really figure out, if Jigsaw remained pure. But I do kind of like the idea that he had set up a bunch of games for Hoffman or Amanda or even Dr. Gordon to carry out. Right. To have a real legacy. This is kind of becoming like a Sith thing from Star Wars. You've always got the apprentice and the pupil,
right,
through the various generations. Now,
and you're right. I mean, it could have been that Hoffman said, you know what, let's just make it so, let's add a little flash and 4 people have to die, 2 people get to live, instead of making it so that all people could live.
Right, especially because in his estimation, from especially what we see of these folks, they're all turning on each other on that carousel. They're just saying the most vicious things and possibly lying, possibly telling the truth. So even the audience doesn't know who to believe. Like one person says, "Oh, I'm pregnant," and this other stuff. But so Saw's the final chapter, or Saw 3D as they called it.
Yep.
I thought it was okay. Watching it again, I don't remember that much about it, even though I watched it yesterday, but that's probably because I watched 3 Saw films yesterday.
Right. Yeah. Wow.
But it's okay. And it does have that annoying thing of like all the effects that were meant to be 3D in the theater, they really stick out at you. And there's all this equipment and stuff. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. I did like at the end that Hoffman does get, he gets back at Jill Tuck in a rather gruesome fashion. Mm-hmm. I love that you see the gaping wound in her face and the tongue hanging out, and it's just like it's disgusting, but it's also cool to look at. It's almost like that autopsy in part 4.
Yeah,
I'm fascinated by that. I'm not like grossed out. I'm like, let's see this. Let's see what a stomach looks like.
Well, so there's 2 things. One, I feel like the traps in the final chapter are supremely gratuitous. Like, I mean, the opening, the opening sequence with the 2 guys and the woman above with the saws, it's just like, well, what is that? What is any of that about? What's the lesson here? And since when is like, this is what Jigsaw is occupying himself with? But also, like, I like the idea of the faux Jigsaw survivor being put through, his own tests, but those tests feel really kind of lame, and they feel unwinnable. So I'm just kind of like, I'm not wild about it. What I did want to throw in really quick, and this is something that kind of jumped out at me. And you being a horror fan of a certain age, this being a franchise that is so steeped in gore and special effects, do you know who did the gore and special effects for the Saw movies?
No,
you don't. Nobody does. Like, it's not and I'm like, why is that? Why is it not like a KNB effects? Like we know who made the Saw movies, because I had to scout around. I mean, it's the nearest I can find is it's Francois Dagenet, who is credited with doing the prosthetics.
Mm-hmm.
And but beyond that, like it's not a thing. Like you don't see, edited by, cinematography by, makeup effects by, and it's like, how shocking. I mean, I was like, why don't I know? And this is why I don't know, because it's not billed prominently. And that seems surprising to me. I don't understand how they went through the entire franchise without really giving credit where credit was due.
I wonder how much of that, though, is almost the disposable kind of nature of these things. I mean, you're right. It is kind of a shame that the horror community wasn't able to make stars out of these folks, but you almost get the feeling like, oh, they're just these torture porn splatter movies that people are going to see. It's almost like the way Paramount thought about Friday the 13th. We're going to put them out. They're going to make us some money, and we're just going to kind of forget about them. The prestige could be for the fanboys, but no.
But we
brought
did.
that up. I hadn't thought about that. Like, but the special effects from start to finish throughout this entire series are not only amazingly well executed without relying on CG for the most part, or at least in a way that's distracting, but also the mechanical props, the production design. It's all creepy, it's all dirty, but it looks like if you had a couple of people who are really insane and willing to do these things, you could build this stuff in real life. I don't know about the one trap that we see in part 7 where it's the two people hanging over like a field of lawnmower blades or whatever the hell was going on. That's the one where I'm like, it's stretching it.
Well, again, and that's the one I'm like going, since when is like Jigsaw worrying about like whether she's playing two guys at the same time? It seems a little outside of his scope.
Yeah, that's part 7 is where they really jump the shark, because there's like this support group, which we get to see a few familiar faces, which is kind of nice.
Yep.
But this idea that he wrote a book and Jigsaw is this figure who's been working for, I don't know, it seems like a half a decade or more,
well, that's
because
the thing.
there's so many flashbacks to other traps and mentions of other traps. I'm like, he must have had the Jigsaw army out there, not just like 3 people, who don't really trust each other.
Well, and yeah, I mean, like, the fact that there is a Jigsaw support group, like really, because we haven't seen that many people walk out of it. So
yeah.
You want to lunge forward into Jigsaw?
Yeah. Oh, the one thing I will say is I think it's in the final chapter. Sean Patrick Flannery is the fraud. I did like his performance, and I like the idea, especially at the end where he had to actually go through the trap that he had claimed was the one that Jigsaw got him. I love the scene at the book signing. Yep. We haven't really talked about Tobin Bell, but he's so good in this movie.
Yep. Yeah, we sure need to. And I mean, like I would say like my favorite, like 2, I think, is really where I went, oh, that guy's good. And then he's kind of comatose for 3, so he doesn't get to do as much. But I think you get to see him like legit smile in 2, like he's really enjoying toying with Detective Matthews. And yes, like I love the fact that we get to see the backstory grow and develop. And I love that they keep bringing him back. I'm like, I like that he keeps getting top billing, even though his character died 3 movies ago.
I do too. And also, one of the things that this series doesn't get enough credit for is Jigsaw becoming John Kramer.
Mm-hmm.
We see more as a man. We see him in the home videos he shot with his wife when he's smiling and they're talking to their baby that was never going to be born. We see him as the broken man, like after his son is killed, and we see the evolution. Even though it's chopped up and played around with the time, we get to see, oh, he was like this, and we keep seeing him spiral down until the point where he really finds, almost like his version of finding God is his version of finding this really dark purpose and then making it his life's work. It's a beautiful story. It's kind of a tragedy because he was obviously a brilliant guy before all this bad stuff happened in his life. But yeah, Tobin Bell was phenomenal. But I did like the fraudulent traps and that kind of a thing of part 7. But yeah, let's talk about Jigsaw, which came out 7 years after the final chapter. And we'll talk briefly about this because this is the movie that I like the least out of all of them, because it just felt like it was partially a reboot. It was partially, we have our new Carrie Elways for the series. I don't know who the guy is who played the hero morgue guy who turns out to be the new Jigsaw, but he, like, his Basil exposition scene at the end was like one of the worst things I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah. Yup. Yeah. No, I think Matt Passmore is the actor. I mean, when it came out, I was like, I knew. I mean, like, I wasn't asking for. I was so ready for this series to be over. And it's funny because, I mean, after 4, I was really excited, and after 5, I was like, I'm not excited anymore.
Mm.
And then it was just kind of a waiting game, like 6, and then I was like, please just let this be over. And what's interesting is watching it this time, knowing what the arc is, there wasn't that sense of like, just get on with it, just get on with it. And I feel like that's, again, what I've often said in talking about this series is that 4 to 7, you got 4 movies, but there's about a movie and a half worth of plot. And it just gets stretched out, because really, for me, the story is about the tracking of Hoffman and his interaction with Jill Tuck and Agent Strom and Erickson, etc. And the traps are kind of ancillary. So yeah, when we talk about this Jigsaw, it's like, I'm impressed that the screenwriters were able to bring it back. And the fact that it works as a standalone feature, I mean, you didn't necessarily have to go back and watch the other movies to know what was going on in Jigsaw.
Right.
And I mean, I feel like that's not the case for the other ones. Like, you need to be watching them watch them sequentially, and you need to be watching them close enough together you can remember what happened in the movie before.
Yeah, I mean, but right off the bat, I agree with what you're saying, but I had problems with it. First of all, it looks like a Transformers movie. Like, it's so glossy and so Hollywood. It looks like, hey, we're going to restart this as a franchise. The second problem is the location. I mean, we were in one house pretty much in Saw 2, but it's such an elaborate, sprawling place. They were moving throughout it. In this one, the people are in a barn, and there's like 2 rooms in it, or 3, and they spend a lot of time just like sitting around yelling at each other, or the one guy's got a mangled leg and he's just kind of stuck. There's no or we're passing between that and like people talking in a lab or people talking in a bar, and none of them are interesting. There's not this grand conspiracy really going on that picks up from the previous movies. Not really. The third act, I think, is pretty strong because Tobin Bell comes back. And I'm genuinely like, I hadn't put this together, like that they would be playing around with time very much like the way they did in part 4. But I'm like, okay, now I'm really interested, because we've established it is John Kramer.
Yeah.
And then it turns out all of this took, even that big clue, which once the reveal happens, I'm like, it was right there. It's like Jigsaw was telling me like, oh, this is the giant trap that Jigsaw built, but he had never used before. And then we're seeing it be used. I'm like, oh, because this is a flashback to 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and so again, I think I was more fine with it than you sound like you were, but I also watched it. I did not watch it. I watched it, independent of the others.
Yeah.
So I really was watching it kind of in its own space. And I felt like it did pretty well in that respect. What I find interesting about the Saw franchise is it's not like there's not a movie within it where, like, you look at the Friday the 13th franchise, like, it's easy for me to go, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one, and I like them in this order. But because Saw is such a arc, it's hard to be like, I really like that one, and well, I like that. It's like I have more of a respect for the series as a whole, as opposed to kind of it's more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it's like, which is your favorite puzzle piece out of this puzzle?
Right.
Like,
Or your
you need
favorite
all of them.
episode, your favorite episode from, the first season of Westworld. You're like, I mean, yes, I suppose I could do that, but why?
Yeah, that's a great point. And the last thing I'll say about Jigsaw is, and we kind of alluded to it, Matt Passmore, I guess is his name. If this was supposed to be not only another Saw movie, but potentially the kickstart of new Saw movies, there's no way this guy is going to be the new Jigsaw. He doesn't have the charisma. He doesn't have the character, because I still don't know why I should care. It's interesting what happens to him and how he's sort of responsible in a lot of ways for some of Jigsaw's misery, but that's a one and done situation.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
and again, I was quite fine. I'm like, I don't really want another Saw movie. I don't need another Saw movie. So, I mean, if anything, I was kind of like, well, great for everybody who wanted one. There it is, and it's not bad. So there you go. But I'm all for just kind of like letting it lie at this point. Like I can't say I'm super psyched about a new Saw movie. I feel like that had its time.
I'm psyched about Spiral only insofar as I don't even know if I watched it, if there was a teaser or anything. I might have sometime earlier this year, but that was like, again, 17 years ago because of COVID. Just the idea of Chris Rock being in a new Saw movie,
sure.
It's instantly like, oh, is he a fan of these movies? Does he really see something in it? Does he feel like he can bring a new voice even just by being part of the cast? I don't know if he produced it or what, but I'll give it a chance. And maybe it's something that, if it does kick off a new series of movies with a strong enough storyline, we don't get enough of these things nowadays where it's like a Netflix show in a theater. Where you have to watch all of them, and they're all intricate and entertaining.
I would say yes, I will go see it.
yeah, or stream it depending on how we get to see it.
Right.
But yeah, so that's we ran way over, and that's okay. I think. But I just
8 movies.
Yes, yeah, very. Was it? Hasn't been 80 minutes, has it? I don't know. I'm
not yet.
But that's Saw. That's Saw in a nutshell, or a bear trap. But so again, to kind of wind down, thanks everybody for watching. Either now or in the future. Thanks for donating to Boxville as this year's Scare-a-Thon charity of choice. Aaron, do you have the latest total? I mean, I know October is not over yet, so there's still time to donate, but where are we at for Scare-a-Thon 2020?
So as of our last, because I am just about through the alphabet now, for those who've been paying attention, we did Tales from the Dark Side, The Untold Story, Violence in a Women's Prison, Warning from Space, X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, and then I have Y and Z on deck for tomorrow, because I had to set aside time to watch all 7 Saw movies. In terms of our grand total, we are looking like we're going to get to it's looking like we're coming close to the between $2,500 and $3,000.
Awesome.
So that's very great. And again, you can keep donating all the way up until tomorrow night, Halloween night, we'll call it. But please, you can either email me at the the email address that's on the blog, or you can just go directly to boxville.org/donate and put in a donation amount. No amount is too large or too small.
Yep, I gave some this morning. I was finally remembered to do it. So yeah, it's again, it's a tremendous effort. Thank you for for doing this with me for the last 5 weeks. I want to also take time to thank, Brian Martinez and John Kitley and Lee Shoquist, who was not able to join us for the shows due to scheduling things. But maybe next year. But I definitely, if you're up for it, I want to do this again live next year because the Scare-a-Thon is always fun. But I've really been enjoying these Friday night frights, as you like to call them.
Absolutely. And I would like to hear your favorite movies from this last week. Favorite fright flicks, unless it was all Saw all the time.
It was pretty much all Saw all the time. Although I did watch, it was 2 days ago, I think I watched the 3 Saw films, because yesterday I watched back-to-back 2 political movies for podcasts. One was Recount, about the 2000 recount starring everyone's favorite actor, Kevin Spacey.
Dang it, Kevin.
And then Lincoln, Steven Spielberg's Lincoln, for my final episode of Real Politic, which will go up on the Kicking the Seat podcast on Monday. So yeah, both very gripping, not quite horror movies, but intense in their own ways.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that episode because I do very much enjoy both of those movies. The first one's infuriating, the other one's inspiring.
Yeah, very much so. But thank you again. Wait, let's see.
Oh, Eric, yes.
Let It Snow was good. I don't know if I know what Let It Snow is.
I don't know that I do either.
You Should Have Left was just You Should Have Left. Was that was the Kevin Bacon horror movie, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I wonder if that was like an ironic title, like instead of sitting through this whole thing, you should have left. But no, so well, thank you for chiming in, Eric. It's good to know that you're keeping up on your fright flicks. This is great.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone, once again, for participating in Scare-a-Thon, either live or catching up later on the recordings. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell for notifications if you want to see more of these. And also, you can join us back here on YouTube live, not you, AC, unless you want to join us to talk about The Mandalorian. But Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. Central, our recurring series about The Mandalorian and Disney Plus called What If He Doesn't Survive? We'll be talking about it live with David Fowley of Keeping It Real and Mike Crowley of You'll Probably Agree. So hope to see you there. Sorry, Let It Snow is from Georgia, the country, not the state. All right, I'll have to look that up. But thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone. And AC, you officially get your Friday night back. So thank you very much. We are ending the stream now. Let's try that again. Now.